Hello everyone, this is Smriti. Welcome to QA automation classes. So today I'm going to start the actual question answers for the Git, which you might expect during your interviews. So in the last Git IntelliJ sessions or the series, you have seen how to do the work in the real time with the help of the that IntelliJ's dialog and IntelliJ's Git, right? So it's really easy to work with the Git from the IntelliJ, but in the interview, the interviewer is expecting you to learn about the commands. So you should at least understand what is happening for the each UI action you are doing through the IntelliJ, what is the corresponding command is getting executed. So I have compiled the list of the questions and the respective commands also are there. We'll see them, right? So in order to do that, we'll be looking at the software. Okay, git bash. Okay, so when you install git, you will have git gui, git cmd, and git bash. Okay, let me show you. So git bash, git gui, and git cmd. So git bash is nothing but here if you see it's a command line interface. Okay, so cli, and here you have to type the command and you can see how those commands are getting executed and what happens after the command is getting executed. So this is nothing but your the command line interface and the respective commands that is going to get executed for the git. And today we're going to discuss there are I think 4 questions I have listed out. We're going to discuss them. Okay, so this is basically going to be a theoretical session, this session, because we will first understand what is a VCS, right? What is a centralized versus distributed version control system, right? What exactly is a git, and what exactly is a git workflow, right? How the code is moved from the developer's machine to the remote repository. So this concept will be looking in detail. Okay, so let's start with first question. So what is VCS? So VCS is nothing but version control system, right? So this version control system, it manages the code based changes over a period of time, right? So we say like today I'm developing some code and tomorrow there is one more developer who develops some other code on top of my code, right? So how to maintain the history and how to maintain the code? So for that we have the VCS, right? So that comes to the second question. So what are the different types of the VCS we have? So we have majorly two types of VCS. One is the centralized VCS, other one is the distributed VCS. Okay, what exactly is this centralized version control system, right? So if I have to give the example of the centralized version control system, so there were subversion, there were CVS, right? Those were the examples of the centralized version control system. Okay, and in the centralized version control system, what happens? There will be a central server, okay, where the developers will commit their code. Okay, and the project source code will be also stored on that central server, right? And what happens if the server itself goes down, right? Then the developers, they cannot access their code and they cannot even push new changes or they cannot retrieve. So it has a single point of the failure, right? So and if the repository gets corrupted, then entire source code is lost, right? And one more demerit with it, like the user has to come connect to the network to do the commit, right? And merging and branching were really difficult with those subversion and CVS, centralized version control system. So these are the few drawbacks of the centralized version control system. So I can sum it up like saying we had a central repository and user has to be connected to the network to push the changes, and it has the single point of the failure. Okay, and because of these limitations, there came the distributed version control system. Okay, so what exactly is this distributed version control system? Unlike the centralized version control system, in distributed version control system there are no single central server. Okay, so there is no single point of failure. So when developers actually they go and clone the project from the remote repository, right? And they gets a copy of the entire code base from the remote to their local, right? So if multiple developers are cloning their code from the remote repository, so they all have the cloned copy of the same remote repository source code, right? So that means the entire backup is there with all the developers, right? So clone has all the code basis changes from the beginning with the commit information, whatever the commit has been happened, right? So all the information is there. Each clone will have the that information. And if at all the source code is getting corrupted in the remote repo, right? So any of the developers local copy that can be used as a backup. Okay, and since we have copied, right, or since the developer has copied the entire repository to their local, they can do their changes and they can commit their changes locally. Okay, and even without connecting to the internet. And whenever they want to push it to the remote repository, they can push it into the remote repository, right? And branching and merging is really very easy in case of the distributed version control systems. Okay, so if you see, the distributed version control system address majority of the drawbacks of the centralized version control system. So nowadays most of the companies are preferring the distributed version control system. Okay, so now come to the third question, what is Git? Okay, so Git is a distributed version control system, right? And it allows the developer to commit, push and pull the code and to collaborate with the fellow developers, right? So, and the last question, what is the Git workflow, right? How the code is moved from the developer's machine to the remote repository. So the developers, right, so after they are developing the code, they will commit that code to the local system, right? Since they have the complete uh, Git repository in their local, so after their code development is done, they will commit those changes in their local first, local Git. Okay, and after that is done, they will push their changes to the remote repository. Okay, and so that when they push their code to the remote repository, the changes is moved from the developer's machine to the remote repository, and the new code changes what is pushed to the remote, they can be accessed by the other developers in the team, right? So other team members or the other developers who wants to access the new code pushed by the developers, they need to pull those changes and use them, right? And there is a like a branching mechanism where we have the master main line of work and we have the feature branch or the bug fix branch. So those things will be look in the in the future session. Okay, so this is how the Git workflow, like developers develops their code locally and commit their code locally, and then they push the code to the remote repository, and other developers can pull those code and start using that code. Okay, so this is all to the today's session. In the next session, we will see some more interview questions. Okay, thank you.